Contracts which cannot be specifically enforced. Not all contracts can be enforced by the remedy of specific performance. The court refuses this relief in certain situations where enforcing the contract would be unfair, impracticable, or unnecessary. Specific performance is not granted when damages are an adequate remedy, such as in contracts for sale of ordinary goods available in the market. Contracts involving personal skill, personal service, or personal confidence, like contracts to sing, paint, or act, cannot be specifically enforced. Contracts which are determinable in nature, meaning they can be terminated at the will of either party, are also not enforceable. Further, contracts that are uncertain, vague, or incomplete cannot be specifically enforced. Lastly, if enforcement of the contract would cause undue hardship or injustice to the defendant, the court may refuse the remedy. Thus, the court grants specific performance only when it serves the ends of justice. Contracts where damages are adequate. Specific performance is not granted in contracts where monetary compensation is sufficient to cover the loss caused by breach. When the injured party can be adequately compensated by damages, there is no need to compel actual performance of the contract. This usually applies to contracts for the sale of ordinary goods that are easily available in the market. For example, if a seller fails to deliver standard goods like wheat or rice, the buyer can purchase them from the market and claim the price difference as damages. Thus, where damages are an adequate remedy, the court refuses specific performance. Example: contract to sell ordinary goods available in the market. Contracts involving personal skill or personal service. Specific performance is not granted in contracts that involve personal skill, personal service, or personal confidence. Such contracts depend on the individual qualities, talent, or ability of a particular person, and therefore cannot be forced to be performed by the court. Compelling performance in these cases would amount to forcing personal service, which the law does not allow. For example, a contract to sing, paint, act, teach, or work as a manager cannot be specifically enforced. If such a contract is breached, the aggrieved party can only claim damages, not actual performance. Example: contract to sing, paint, or act. Case law. Vaishdegree College v. Lakshmi Narain. Contract of personal service cannot be specifically enforced. Contracts which are determinable in nature. Specific performance is not granted in contracts which are determinable in nature, meaning contracts that can be terminated at the will of either party. Since such contracts can be lawfully ended at any time, it would be meaningless and unfair for the court to compel their performance. Enforcing such contracts would serve no practical purpose, as the party could immediately terminate the contract again. For example, a revocable agency or a partnership at will is determinable in nature. Therefore, contracts which are determinable cannot be specifically enforced by the court. Example: revocable partnership agreement. Contracts which are uncertain or vague. Specific performance is not granted in contracts where the terms are uncertain, vague, or incomplete. For a contract to be specifically enforced, its terms must be clear, definite, and capable of execution. If the court is unable to determine the exact obligations of the parties due to uncertainty, it cannot compel performance. For example, an agreement that does not clearly mention the price, subject matter, or time of performance is considered vague. Therefore, contracts which are uncertain or lack clarity cannot be specifically enforced. Example: agreement without clear price or subject matter. Contracts causing hardship or inequity. Specific performance is not granted where enforcing the contract would cause undue hardship or injustice to the defendant. Since specific performance is an equitable and discretionary remedy, the court carefully considers whether enforcement would be fair to both parties. If circumstances have changed after the contract and performance would result in serious hardship, the court may refuse the relief. Similarly, if the contract is unfair, one-sided, or oppressive, specific performance will not be granted. Thus, Contracts causing hardship or inequity are not specifically enforced by the court. Case law. Narendra v. Riviera Apartments, specific performance refused due to hardship and changed circumstances. Contracts which require continuous supervision of court. Specific performance is not granted in contracts where continuous supervision by the court is required. The court cannot constantly monitor whether the contract is being properly performed on a day-to-day basis. If enforcement of a contract demands ongoing control, technical oversight, or regular directions from the court, such a contract is not suitable for specific performance. This usually applies to contracts involving complex duties, long-term management, or ongoing operations, where performance cannot be clearly defined or easily enforced by a single court order. Example: a contract to manage a factory, run a business, supervise construction work continuously, or provide long-term services cannot be specifically enforced because it would require constant supervision by the court. Legal principle. Courts grant specific performance only when the contract is clear, definite, and capable of enforcement without continuous monitoring. Contracts which are by nature impossible to perform. Specific performance is not granted in contracts which are by nature impossible to perform. When performance of a contract is physically or legally impossible, the court cannot compel a party to perform it. Such impossibility may exist from the beginning or may arise later due to events beyond the control of the parties. Enforcing such contracts would be meaningless and unjust. Example: a contract to sell a house which has already been destroyed by fire, or a contract to do an act prohibited by law. Thus, contracts which are impossible to perform cannot be specifically enforced by the court. Contracts opposed to public policy or unlawful. Specific performance is not granted in contracts which are unlawful or opposed to public policy. A contract whose object or consideration is illegal, immoral, or forbidden by law cannot be enforced by the court. Since courts exist to uphold law and justice, they will not compel performance of an illegal agreement. Such contracts are void and have no legal effect. Example: a contract for smuggling goods, bribery, or any activity prohibited by law. Thus, contracts which are unlawful or against public policy cannot be specifically enforced under the Specific Relief Act, 1963. Conclusion. Sections 10 to 13 of the Specific Relief Act, 1963 clearly lay down the rules regarding contracts that can and cannot be specifically enforced. The court grants specific performance only when it is fair, just, and equitable, and refuses it when damages are sufficient or enforcement would cause injustice. Understanding these provisions with examples and case laws is essential in questions related to specific relief and remedies. Specific performance is an equitable and discretionary remedy, and therefore it is not granted in every case of breach of contract. The court allows specific performance only when damages are not an adequate remedy and enforcement of the contract is fair, just, and practicable. Contracts are refused specific enforcement when they involve personal service, are determinable, uncertain, unlawful, impossible to perform, cause hardship or inequity, or require continuous supervision by the court. Thus, the law ensures a balance between justice and practicality, and specific performance is granted only where it truly serves the ends of justice.